In this video, we're going to take a look at how to restore lost symmetry, working in subdivision models and also in Dynamesh. So while we're sculpting, you might find that you're zoomed in on an area and doing a lot of work, and perhaps, I've changed the shape of this brow, for example. And because I'm zoomed in, maybe I don't realize that I don't have X symmetry turned on. So the changes that I'm making aren't propagating to the other parts of the mesh. So I'll step down my subdivision levels and just do a few changes here. We'll adjust the brow ridge, and perhaps we'll adjust the jawline, the shape of the chin, and perhaps the ear as well. Then when I zoom out, I realize these parts are only changed on one side of the mesh and not the other. Now, this isn't the end of the world. It's actually quite easy to fix this. If we're working on a subdivision model, that is a model that has multiple subdivision levels that you can step up and down with D and Shift D. Step down to your lowest subdivision level and make sure X symmetry is turned off. We'll mask one half of the model, like so. We're going to mask the side of the model that we want to retain. Then we're going to go to Tool, Deformation, and there's a button here called Smart Resim. If I click that, you'll notice that it's already set to the X-axis. I can change the axis with these two buttons, or these three buttons, X, Y, and Z, that are nested inside the main button. If I click that, you see it mirrors those changes across. What I want to do is I want to step up each subdivision level and Smart Resim each one individually. The reason we do that is because if we Smart Resim from the top subdivision level, Zbrush is going to have to compare millions of points. Whereas if we start at the lowest subdivision level and work our way up, it has to compare fewer points at a time. It gives us a more accurate result, plus it doesn't take as long. So there we go. Now, something I want to point out is this has resimmed the entire model. If I go back to before that resim, you see that this model, if I step back up to the highest subdivision, is actually asymmetrical. I've taken some care to make sure that some elements here are actually asymmetrical on their own. I've got different wrinkles in the nose, here in the mouth, on the brow. Everything is just subtly asymmetrical, and I think that's very important when you're sculpting. If I've lost my symmetry and I do a global resim, I'm going to lose that asymmetry. But here's how we fix that. What I'll do is I will go to the Tool menu, go to Morph Target, and at the highest subdivision level, in this case level 5, I'll go to Morph Target and I will store a Morph Target. Morph Targets store a copy of the mesh in memory. So if I were to make a big change to the model here, I could switch between my stored Morph Target and that changed version. You can only store one Morph Target at a time. So I'm going to delete that and we'll store it again. So I've now stored the model in its current asymmetrical state. That's the entire head, including those changes that I want to propagate over to the other side. I'm going to repeat that process. I'm going to step down. I'm going to mask the side of the model that I want to mirror across. Go to Deformation and click Smart Resim. Step up, Smart Resim. Step up, Smart Resim again. Step up once again, Smart Resim. Then one more time, Smart Resim. There we go. Now I have symmetrized the model, but I've lost all the desirable asymmetry. So what I will do is I will go back to my Morph Target, and I'm going to click Switch, and that switches it back to the previous version. However, the alternate, the Morph Target, is still there, the one that is perfectly symmetrized, there. So I'm going to switch back to the asymmetrical version and go to B for Brush, M for Morph. The hotkey for the Morph brush, as you can see, is O. Select the Morph brush. Then I will simply turn up my Z intensity, and I'm going to brush those areas that I changed. Turn down my Z intensity a bit, and I can blend it off. And now I can go in here, and I can blend in those symmetrical parts that I want to keep and maintain the asymmetrical parts that I also want to keep. So if I were to come through here and blend this out, you see that it would symmetrize the brow. Well, that's typically not an area that's symmetrical. I don't want these brow wrinkles to be the exact same on both sides. But I do want that bone structure that I changed, the ear structure, the jawline, I want those to remain symmetrical. So that is how we will resymmetrize a model that is a subdivision mesh. There's a different process that we will use if we're working in Dynamesh. Now here we have a mesh that is Dynameshed. If we look under the geometry menu, you see there are no subdivision levels and Dynamesh is turned on. If we go into frame mode, you can see that it is a Dynamesh topology. It's just evenly spaced and distributed little quads. Now, because there's no subdivision levels here, we can't use Smart Resim going up the subdivision levels to actually resymmetrize this mesh. So if I turn off my symmetry, and let's say that we've created some asymmetrical detail that we actually want to bring over to the opposite side. I'll just go to the Move brush. I'll go to my brush controls. I'm going to open up Curve, and I'm going to turn on Accurate Curve mode. That just allows me to create more of a pointed tip on my Move brush. It's really nice for creating little spines. I just want to create a nice little ridge of spines along the temple here. Just some kind of, feasible detail that we might sculpt onto a creature, accidentally making it asymmetrical that we want to bring over to the opposite side later. So maybe let's bring one point out here from the brow. We'll turn our draw size down, put some more points like this. There we go. Okay, so let's say I want these details to actually transfer over to the other side. To do that, we're going to use a different tool. We're going to use Mirror and Weld. So to begin with, we're going to have to turn on our floor plane. Now our floor plane by default is the Y plane, like this. But I'm going to turn on the X button here and turn off Y, so it gives us the X plane. And I'm going to turn off perspective. Now I need to go to the Draw menu, and I'm going to adjust the elevation slider you find here. That changes the position of that plane. If I zoom in, you see I'm trying to place that right down the center line. So let's go to Draw again. Go to our elevation slider and put it about there, right at 0. So that's going to place it right down the center line of the model. Now I'm going to go to Geometry, Modify Topology, Mirror and Weld. X is turned on, so I'm doing it across the X-axis. I can change that axis here. So I click Mirror and Weld, and what it does is it mirrors this side over, deletes the faces that were in its place, and then welds them back together. If I go into frame mode and zoom in, sometimes you can actually see that little extra line there. There's the Mirror and Weld line. If there happens to be a seam, you can simply smooth it back with a smooth brush or sculpt over it with the clay tubes brush or whatever brushes you prefer. So this gives us this really nice symmetry back to our model that we lost before. So we were able to actually sculpt across this, bring some more asymmetry in, which is actually always desirable. And we can change up some of these horns just slightly, go with the Move brush, and maybe just slightly adjust their positioning just to make it a little bit more interesting. The important point is, though, that we're able to reintroduce symmetry in a Dynamesh mesh in a similar fashion that we did to the subdivision model, but using a different tool. And again, that is Mirror and Weld under the tool Geometry menu. And this is actually quite fun for creating more surreal kind of creations. If I were to change my axis here to Y, and then go back to my floor plane and change the floor plane position, let's go to Draw, and let's change our elevation. And then Mirror and Weld along the Y-axis. You see, it gives us a very unusual result. There we go. So these two heads are actually welded together. If I were to smooth across their transition, let's turn on X symmetry for that. If I smoothed across their transition, I would end up with a blend, as you can see. So this is actually really useful for creating, I find, very unusual or surreal types of forms. Sometimes I use this to create organic shapes like rocks or maybe gemstones. Sometimes just environmental elements I might use for this. Here, of course, it's completely surreal, but the important point to note is that you can actually mirror and weld across multiple axes to create different types of shapes. So in this video, we've seen two different methodologies for actually restoring symmetry that's been lost in a model. The first being the Smart Resim, and that is only for subdivision models. And the second, of course, being Mirror and Weld, which we use for Dynamesh meshes. So anytime that you find that you have lost your symmetry, and it will happen, rest assured you're always able to restore it. It's just a matter of knowing the right tool to use and how to go about applying it. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you in the next lesson.